I was 24 when I met a dashing man. Yes, indeed. He was from Buffalo, New York, and he was 6'4", and he was older than I was. He was 14 years older than I was. And we began a wonderful romance. Now, I lived in Long Beach, but he would drive down from North Hollywood. And it was really an MGM musical of many sorts. And he was marvelous. And he was a contemporary impressionist artist. And he was fascinated with the fact that I was a performing artist because he was kind of shy. And I was fascinated that he could just sit with a regular #2 pencil and create these marvelous drawings. So it really was a meeting of the minds, hearts, and souls. And the best part is, my parents adjusted and talked to my parents and said I would like to bring my friend. And they're like, oh, okay. We drove back to Colorado, and everybody was being wonderfully polite about it. And Jim and I decided that he would stay in the guest bedroom. I'd sleep in my bedroom. Everything's fine. And they really began to enjoy him. And at this time, quite a few of our friends had either tested or had died of AIDS. I went to help him with his tie, and I saw this bruise right here. I went, where did you... And I realized in that moment, he was sick. And I remember looking up at him once again, nonverbal. I thought, oh my gosh, I hope I'm up for this. It was a Kaposi's sarcoma lesion at the base of his neck. We became very polite with each other. My family was wonderfully supportive, even though they weren't quite sure what was going on. All the way up to his death, which was October 29th of 1993, I held him as he died. I was then the first widower in my family. Now, he comes from a New England family, upstate New York. He was the youngest of 4 kids. His mother had passed by the time he was getting seriously ill. And I got a call. This is back in the day when we all had landlines, and I picked it up, and it was his sister calling. And she said, oh, you must be his friend. I said, yes, I am. She said, I am coming to visit. And she named a little motel that was nearby where we lived. And I said, oh, okay. I said, would you like to speak to Jim? She said, yes. So he picked up the extension in the bedroom and they talked. So after they finished, I went in and he goes, now, my sister's coming to visit. I said, yes. It'll be nice to meet her. This will be the first time I've met any of your family. And he said, well, now, she is a former nun. I went, oh. And he goes, now, she can be a little hard. I said, okay. Well, she shows up. Now, she's the age of my mother. Now, Jim was 14 years older than I was, and he was the youngest in his family. So this sort of little grandma type comes to my front door, and she steps in. She looked around and was like, oh, well, this looks like a real home. So I said, can I get you a cup of coffee? Won't you come in? I take her coat, throw it over the back of the couch, take her back into the bedroom where he is, and they're having a conversation, and they have nice conversations, and it's getting to be late, and she actually could walk from the motel. So I offered to walk her home because she'd never been outside of the state of New York. So it was a couple of days, and then I had to take Jim to the hospital. There was a series of tests he had to undergo. And so we get him, they take him off in a little wheelchair. And I said, why don't we go downstairs and get a cup of coffee? So we do. And I can sense her tension. And I don't get a full sip when she said, I'm taking him home. I said, I'm sorry? She said, I'm going to take my brother home. We can take care of him. I went, he is home. And she said, well, I don't know anything about you or your people. I said, oh, I would tread very carefully. And she goes, well, I want to make sure that. I said, you know what? You're showing up at the third act. Where the hell have you been for the past 10 years? And now you think you're going to step in? Oh, no. Actually, as my grandmother would say, here's your hat. What's your hurry? I need you to leave. She goes, I've never been spoken to. I said, I'm going to think you're just simply lovely, but I want you out of my house. She left the next day. After his death, a friend was over at my house and we were just kind of sitting as one does. You know, in the Jewish tradition, they sit Shiva. Phone rings and she was closest to it. She picked it up. It was this woman. And she looked at me and she said, no, he's actually not. Can I take a message for him? And as I watched my dear friend Liza's face, her eyes filled with tears and she began to cry. And she said, I have to hang up now. To this day, 30 years later, she's never told me what that woman said. It was harder for Jim than I. His family didn't understand. That's why he had moved to California. But I like to think that we had a really good time together, and I do. There are still days I miss him. There's days I miss a lot of them. But we had a wonderful time, and much like in my family's tradition, we had a wonderful relationship. I'd had Jim cremated, and it was a joke for us for years. Somebody gave us a beautiful Lenox ginger jar, very fancy, that sat on our mantelpiece. And he used to say, oh, when I die, just put me in there. Well, I did. I had him cremated and had him put in the jar. And when I went to pick him up, it still makes me laugh. The woman said, oh, yes, I have that. And there was all this duct tape wrapped around it with a lot of paperwork stuck to the bottom. She goes, oh, and then a small box. Now, Jim was almost 6 feet, 4 inches tall. And I went, both of them? She goes, I said, oh, more Jim than jar. We have more. Oh, okay. So I took both of them. And it sat on the mantelpiece of our apartment. Now, Jim's therapist gave me a marvelous gift. She gave me his hour of time once a week. And she said to me one time, would you be willing to open yourself up to having coffee with somebody who might, she said, I've never dealt with somebody who has dealt with so much grief. I said, sure. So she arranged for coffee with a woman, and I went to Cantor's there on Fairfax, in the Fairfax district, to meet a woman. And here's this little wound up woman with literally a scarf tied under her chin. And I sat down and I said, it's nice to meet you. And she was very stoic, older lady, she probably in her 80s. I said, so I'm just going to say, what do we do now? And she rolled back her sleeve and showed me her tattoo from Auschwitz. And her story was unbelievable. Coming off of a cattle car and watching her family slaughtered in front of her. Her younger daughter had, I'm not sure what type of defect, they just bayoneted her in front of her. I was aghast, and she said, and so this is what we do, and it is what I've lived with for these 30-some years. In the morning you wake up, you put on your clothes and you go outside, and the next morning you get up and you put on your clothes and you go outside. Life requires that you continue. Death is an odd thing. People don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. And the strange thing was, even in my own community, the AIDS crisis was so devastating that other couples or other gay men, and this happens with couples anyway when one dies, you feel like you're the third wheel. Even when people are being kind and they take you to dinner, there should be 4 people, there's only 3. I remember sitting at our dining room table probably a week after Jim had passed away, and suddenly that little 1-bedroom apartment was so big I thought there's too much room. So the grieving process for people, especially for those that have lost a partner due to AIDS, was very difficult because nobody wanted to talk about it. They were afraid it was going to happen to them. I had a friend of mine frankly say, I don't know what to do for you. I just know you're so hurt. I don't know what to do. I said, well, neither do I. So let's just do this and figure it out.